Nell is monitoring our chat box today. She'll be adding our housekeeping items there, and she'll also be checking in on Q&A, which we will address all at the end. So the Big Ten Early Learning Alliance was officially launched in 2023. It brings together experts from 18 universities, including our newest members from the West Coast. The mission of the Big Ten Early Learning Alliance is strengthening early childhood policies and practices through science. And it's funded by a generous gift from American Family Insurance. So now let's get into today's event. I will start by providing some opening comments on what we mean by family engagement and why it is so critical in the early childhood space. So we'll start with a little bit of a definition. And actually, let me preface all of this by saying that there's absolutely no one way to do or even define family engagement. It is as much a relational and an interpersonal construct as it is a structural and operational one. In fact, maybe even more so. And that's why we are emphasizing the social dynamics and interaction patterns as foundational to family engagement. We consider it the joint influence and collaborative efforts of parents and educators working in alignment with one another to support a child's success. But most importantly, family engagement is very family, not school-centered. Other characterizations of parents' roles in education promote activities that are determined and directed by the school in sort of a one-size-fits-all mentality. But we conceptualize family engagement in a more dynamic manner, respectful of families' values and beliefs that educators can embrace and leverage. Considering family engagement as a multi-dimensional construct allows us to capture the many ways that parents support children's learning and development. It includes meaningful actions to directly support children's learning and development, and also actions that represent an active connection with their child's educators. And it includes both structural elements and relational aspects. In other words, structurally, what parents do, but also relational aspects such as the quality of parent-educator interactions or how they interact. And the evidence for family engagement is abundantly clear. Decades of correlational and more recently experimental research speaks to the importance of alignments and collaborations between families and educators. For example, longitudinal research has found that the contributions of meaningful family engagement in the early childhood years, including engagement actions that occur in both home and school contexts, predicts both parental and child competence. Recent longitudinal research supported by the Early Learning Network, exploring malleable factors that may support the maintenance of early childhood, early learning gains, found that family-school connections in pre-K predict children's social skills, behavior problems, and academic achievement through first grade. Randomized controlled intervention trials also find that not only do connections between parents and teachers cause improvements in children's social, behavioral, and language and literacy outcomes relative to business as usual early childhood practices, but also that the relationship formed between parents and teachers mediates the effects of family engagement on children's outcomes. In other words, relationships are the active ingredient of engagement that influences its impact on children. So the research is clear, the evidence is abundant, and yet despite all of this, family engagement practices and policies are still largely regulated by minimal standards to involve parents, and rarely will they talk about true partnerships. So today you will hear from 4 Big Ten researchers who will share a range of programs reflecting the multiple dimensions of family engagement that I've been discussing here. You'll hear from Dr. Lisa Knoche from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Dr. Karen Bierman from Penn State University, Dr. Jimena Caso from University of Maryland, and Dr. Kara Swalman from Michigan State University. So I'll now turn things over to Dr. Lisa Knoche.
Thanks, Sue. Go ahead and get started here. All right, I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm part of this panel, having an opportunity to represent our work coming out of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm representing our team. This includes Sue Sheridan, who you just had an opportunity to hear from, as well as many others who have contributed to this work. Their names are listed here on the slide. We're really grateful to the funding sources who have allowed us to engage in this work, and certainly the programs and community partners that we've had a chance to work with, without whom this work would not be possible. So I'm going to be sharing some information on a specific evidence-based approach that we've been working on at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to promote strong partnerships in early childhood settings. So I want to ground the work and extend kind of the comments that Sue provided around partnerships. That's really an essential, a foundational element to the way that we have positioned this work. I want to tell you a bit about the approach that we've studied and some of the key features and elements, and then share the outcomes and results of this work and what we've learned over time to be important, and talk about implications of that work. So to start with, and share that the idea that this work is really grounded in partnerships between educators and families. And to effectively promote partnership, it's essential to understand those essential features of partnership. So I'm going to do that by positioning this idea of partnership relative to parent involvement. And parent involvement and parent partnership are aspects of relationships that you see often in early childhood programs. When I share more about the Getting Ready approach, it is intended to promote the idea of partnership versus a more parent involvement type of relationship. Again, both of these have important contributions in early childhood settings, but we are positioning our work in the parent partnership space. And so parent partnerships are individualized approaches to promoting children's learning, taking into account unique family strengths, culture, priorities, and composition. In a partnership type of relationship, communication is happening regularly, and it's back and forth, it's bidirectional over time. There are mutual decisions being made between parents and educators about priorities for children's learning and a mutual determination of roles. So this stands a bit in contrast to a relationship that is more grounded in an involvement philosophy that tends to be more one size fits all. Communication is often one direction, coming from center or school program to home. Educators are often making the primary decisions about children's learning and are determining ways for parents to be involved in children's learning. So as I move forward, I just want you to be clear that the Getting Ready approach is intended to promote this idea of partnership. This work is really important because early childhood programs do value parent engagement and value parent partnerships. And though this is a priority for programs, they're often left wondering, how do we go about doing this? So it is a priority, it is a need, but there is a lack of clarity on some specific actions that programs and educators can take to promote partnerships. And that's really the foundation of the Getting Ready approach. For the last 20 years, we've been implementing, testing, and refining a family engagement approach called Getting Ready. And it is about enhancing family engagement through partnerships. It provides educators with strategies and structures for building partnerships with families. It really provides support to educators so they can become more confident and confident and competent in their work with families to promote outcomes. So the getting ready approach in brief, if you're interested in more information, there is a website for you to visit. But in general, the approach includes 8 strategies that are used by educators in their interactions with families. It includes a collaborative process, a structured collaborative process for educators to use when they're engaging with families in meetings or in conversations. The approach can be implemented in structured family interactions in early childhood programs. So things like home visits or parent-teacher conferences, regularly scheduled kinds of activities. But it can also be used in unstructured family interactions. So emails, texts, phone calls that might be going back and forth between center and home. Getting Ready extends and supplements curriculum programming. It is not a curricula. It is not a standardized protocol. It really is a way of doing business. It is responsive to the needs of families and educators. Um, while the strategies are very much aligned with best practices, educators are supported through a training and coaching model to be intentional about the use of strategies, determining which strategies are optimal for particular families in a particular setting at a particular time. Um, all of the structure and the approach is focusing on children's learning. It is intended to improve children's learning. It is intended to support dynamic parent-child relationships and promote strong educator partnerships. And it's doing that by providing training and support to educators. So let me tell you a bit about what we've learned. We've seen significant positive gains in children's social skills over time. Preschoolers who were involved in the Getting Ready approach were better than 75% of their peers in handling emotions, managing behavior, and developing and sustaining relationships. This is a finding. I've provided results from one of our RCTs. But this is a recurrent finding, something we see consistently with our approach, benefits for children's social skills. We also have seen positive outcomes for children's early reading and language outcomes. So children who are part of Getting Ready scored better than 80% of their peers in language and early reading skills. Another important outcome for us is parent-child relationships. So through implementation of the Getting Ready approach, we've seen statistically significant gains in parents' skills in interacting with their children. So through observed behaviors, we saw parents in the Getting Ready condition interacting with their children using a greater degree of warmth and sensitivity than did their counterparts in the control condition. We also saw parents demonstrating greater quality and behaviors in supporting their children's autonomy. So better skills around warmth and sensitivity, better skills around supporting children's autonomy for parents who had an opportunity to engage in Getting Ready. And our third outcome really is around partnership. And so we saw gains in parent-educator partnership as reported by educators. The great majority reported improvements in their partnerships with families. And as I mentioned, we are targeting educator competence and confidence. And so our approach supported positive gains in educators feeling more prepared to interact with parents. So you can see this growth over time. I have more conversations with parents about improvements made or struggles. So this brief presentation gives you a bit of information about our approach. Getting Ready is an evidence-based family engagement approach. It includes 8 strategies. It includes a collaborative structure, and it can be used across really all early childhood settings that are serving children birth to 5, family childcare homes, center-based, home-based. Our findings are coming from all of those various program types. We've seen positive outcomes on children, on parent-child relationships, on partnerships with families. Um, We've also learned that training and dedicated resources towards promoting parent engagement is really essential. And so, as we look ahead towards administrative structures that are needed, administrative policy really must allow for planning time and meeting time with families to facilitate partnerships. And importantly, the work of educators in early childhood settings um, is can be very challenging, and this can be some new content for them, given a primary focus often on children. So professional development and coaching are really essential to promote this kind of an approach. So thanks so much for this opportunity. We're going to take all questions at the end. I think if you have any, you can certainly put them in chat and we'll come back to that. But I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Karen Bierman.
There it goes. Thanks so much, Lisa. That was great. I always love hearing about getting ready. Okay. I didn't start. I'm not sure what happened to my first slide. There we go. I'm going to be talking about another approach to parent engagement and focusing in this one on the READY project and some of its longitudinal impact. So as the presenters already mentioned, there are lots of different ways to think about parent engagement. I'm going to focus in particular on this approach where the goal is to really facilitate parents' capacity to support home learning in a way that creates more alignment and partnership across the school and family contexts. And the logic for this particular approach really has to do with the positive impact on child school readiness skills. And so in the area of families who are struggling with socioeconomic disadvantage in particular, it can be very helpful if they're getting some resources that that sort of mitigate some of the resource deficits that they often experience. Now, often preschools will offer families lists of things that they can do, handouts, suggested, things they could be doing in the community. They might send them online lists of different activities. But basically, what tends to happen in those programs is a pretty big socioeconomic divide where more resourced families tend to have more flexibility in their ability to both search, find, and then follow up with suggestions and advice. The READY project was done in collaboration with Head Start programs. And as this audience, I'm sure knows, those families are low income for the most part. And what we found in working with Head Start over the years is a lot of the families have limited resources and limited time for this kind of activity. They're often living in situations where there's just enough instability in life that it becomes challenging to search for activities and follow through. It's also the case that some children are kind of hard to engage in learning activities, and not every parent really enjoys that process of reading or playing with their children at home. And so learning activities can sometimes be a burden more than feeling like a partnership and a common effort. So our team has really approached this challenge by figuring out how we could create resources for parents to use at home that foster more collaborative feelings of collaborative partnerships with schools, that build more of that relationship and connection, and that really involve more fun and rewarding activities for parents to use with a minimal sort of burden on their part to find and get resources, etc. And our approach to doing that has been by using guided play activity kits. So you might be familiar with the activity kits. There are a lot of companies now that sell sort of pricey activity kits, like Kiwi does science kits, where parents get materials kind of ready-made to open and use with their kids. So our goal, these particular pictures are from a study that came after Ready P, where we were really focused on this idea of trying to package materials that were thematic, that were you could open, they were ready to use, builds on some of the lessons learned that we had. But that's the idea. You get a package, you open up with your child, you've got fun things to do that are aligned and synced with the school activities. In the Ready Parent program, the activity kits that we used and the approach that we used was really designed and implemented in partnership with Head Start programs. The guided activity kits, these packages were delivered by home visitors. Head Start, as you know, has a very strong home visiting program. We basically supplemented that program to provide more intensive home visits with these home learning kits. The materials in the kits were all aligned with the Ready Classroom program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the classroom program in a minute. But it was being used by all the Head Start classrooms that participated in this evaluation. The emphasis across both domains is social emotional learning. That's the foundation of the Ready program. And then an emphasis on language and emergent literacy skills. The actual kits included scripted books to facilitate parents' ability to do interactive reading. And scripted just means that some suggested questions you could ask were printed in on each page or put in with stickers. And those stories were chosen very much to emphasize the social emotional skills that children were working on at the same time in the classroom. And then we had a series of pretend play activities like playing post office, playing grocery store, that included both props for the pretend play, some ideas about how to set up a play. There was always a little storybook that guided. You can see this one. Carly plays post office, that sort of gave ideas about how to go about it. And then embedded in that pretend play was a focus on emergent literacy skills, especially in the Ready P case, letter recognition. The home visitors, as I mentioned, they're bringing the activity kits to the family, and they're also going through them with a focus on sort of personalizing the use. What are the parents' main goals with their child? What are the kinds of activities that they're enjoying the most? There's a sort of check-in at the beginning of each session, and then a reflection afterwards, just to think about what was most useful for them. They can skip activities if they don't want to use them. The home visitors also really emphasize some strategies that could make doing these learning games and activities more fun for the parent and child, especially around positive support, language and conversation, talking during the activities, emotion coaching. And there was a focus on managing conflict using collaborative planning and problem-solving dialogue. So this is just in the snapshot, the evaluation design for the Ready P program. Children were recruited, I mentioned, families were recruited from Head Start classrooms that were already using the Classroom Ready program. And then they were randomized within classroom. So about half of them got this intervention, and the other half got a control intervention where they basically got mailed home simple math activities. We did the original trial between Head Start. The pretest was at the beginning of Head Start. Then there was a series of 16 home visits, 10 during Head Start, 6 during the transition into kindergarten, and then follow-ups through the elementary school grades. And we're just now finishing, you're going to get hot off the press, our analyses of how the kids were doing in grade 7. So this is, I've included some papers in case you want to actually see what was happening at each grade level, but this is just a summary of the pattern of findings across these different periods of the longitudinal follow-up. The numbers here are effect sizes or average effect sizes in an outcome domain. So you can see in the area of the child's literacy skills, we were seeing effects at the post-test that have really stayed pretty stable through grade 7. We were seeing effects on learning engagement. That is a combination of both executive function and then behavioral on task behavior. You can see we had post-test effects on them through grade 7. And the other interesting thing is that we're actually seeing as kids get older, a little stronger effects on some of their social adjustment. The social adjustment in grade 7 here is the kids' self-report of their peer connections, and conduct problems is the teacher's rating of their behavior problems at school. So it's really exciting to see this investment in parent engagement early on can have these long-term effects now lasting even through the transition into middle school. The biggest question we usually get is, can this really be scaled? ReadyP costs about $2,800 per family to deliver it the way we did. So we're very interested, as are other people, in whether it could be scaled down. And I don't have the answer to that today, but it made us look at some of our earlier data that we had on the Ready Classroom program, where we used a very light touch. We just sent some materials home to parents via Backpack Express to let them know what was happening in the classroom. And we did provide some DVDs illustrating how they could do interactive reading and some storybooks at home. And we've also seen sustained effects, mostly through improvements in parent-child conversations, later parent-adolescent communication, one of the contributors to the Ready Classroom effects on high school adjustment. So we're fans of the idea of this using prepared guided activity kits to engage parents in home. We think it is very important to do it in some way in a connection with school that gives them that relationship, that feeling of collaboration and capacity to personalize it. We have had the most success with the more intensive guided play programming that provided that coach, but we're really interested also in research that might optimize design, delivery system, cost effectiveness to capture this kind of effect in a way that makes it possible to scale larger. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pass things along to Dr. Jimena Craso.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Karen. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. It's really nice be here and present my work. My name is Jimena Coso. I am assistant professor in the program of Human Development at University of Maryland. So today I will present some of the work that we are doing in my lab, which is the HOLA STEM lab, stands for Home Opportunities for Latine in Advancing in STEM. So as the name of the lab says, most of my research focus on Latine family engagement, particularly looking at how Latine families engage in mathematics at home. So the title of my presentation is Latine Family Engagement, Expanding What Counts as Learning. Just to provide some statistics about Latine population in the US, we know that Latine families are the largest immigrant origin group in the US, and almost 40% of students in Head Start classroom are considered dual language learners, being Spanish the most common non-English language. And in terms of the student population K-12, 25% of students are Latine. So Latine families bring immense linguistic, cultural and access to school and the community in general. However, we still have research showing that Latine children underperform compared to their peers in academic domains as early as in kindergarten. And in terms of family engagement, we also have research showing that Latino parents engage in fewer educational activities compared to non-Latino parents. However, there are plenty of research showing that Latino families' involvement may look differently. And this is because of the cultural and historical context that affect the home environment. So what do we know so far is that Latino families engage in learning opportunities with their kids at home through household routines and daily tasks. So I am here highlighting some of the research showing that Latino families engage in learning opportunities through grocery shopping, setting the table, cooking, and doing laundry. Just to provide an example of how it may look different for this group on how engagement looks like. However, the measures that we tend to use to assess parental engagement often overlook these type of activities and these learning practices. So we tend to have this deficit perspective showing that Latino families do not engage as often as other groups. So I will go ahead and present the findings from some of my research. This first paper that I want to talk about is a paper where we develop culturally sensitive measure for the home mathematical environment looking at Latino families. So for this study, we use a mixed method approach. We interview Latino families, and based on the finding from these interviews, we develop items and we created a survey that was then assessing the home mathematical environment of Latino families. What we found in this research was that Latino caregivers identify older siblings as having an essential role in supporting early mathematical at home with the young kid. We also found that Latino families tend to differentiate between what happened in school and what happened at home. And this is something that the literature about Latino family engagement have been saying about, but this is particularly in the home mathematical environment. Although Latino families do say that they engage in formal activities, and the formal activities are those that has the intention of teaching, in this case, math. The last thing that I want to say in related to this paper is that Latino families engage in math activities through a large variety of everyday activities, which sometimes are unplanned and very spontaneous, but do have the meaning of learning math, like, as I was saying, doing laundry or cooking, for example. So in another study, what we look at was what are the most frequently activities and then the less frequent activities that Latino families engage with their children at home in related to mathematics. So using the measure that I just described that we developed, looking at the context of Latino engagement, we found that the most common activities were the items that were actually developed from the interviews with parents. So, for example, cleaning up after playing, watching TV shows or apps with numbers, talking about numbers when setting or cleaning the table, using number when cooking, and using number when doing household chores. So all these items were items that are not typically used in measures assessing the home mathematical environment. However, those are items that we develop in the new measure and are actually the ones that families relate using the most. The less common activities are those that are talking about number when using money, playing games with number, playing card games that have numbers, playing play money, and playing dice game. So as you see, there is kind of a pattern here with the term playing. Latino families seems like they don't engage in playing as much as other group, and that there are research showing that. However, I will come back to this point later on in my other study. But just want to say that these are the items that are more typically used in measure assessing the home environment. In the last study that I want to highlight in this presentation is where we look at groups, profiles of Latina families and how they engage in mathematics at home. So we differentiate between formal, household, and play activities. So by formal, the definition is those activities that parents do have an intention on teaching math. Household are the activities that I just mentioned recently, like cleaning up after playing, things like that. And play, playing games with numbers or something like that. So we found two profiles of families. So what I want to highlight from this study is that Latina families with higher educational level were significantly more likely to be in the balanced numeracy profile, which is this one, than caregivers with lower educational level. And then the other part that I want to highlight is that fathers and grandparents were more likely to be in the balanced numeracy profile than mothers. So, sorry. So mothers are actually the ones that do not engage as much in play activities. And that is very interesting, and that is why I wanted to come back to this point about playing. And that leads me to my next slides about some key findings from my study. So I want to highlight a couple of things. First is that Latina families engage in numeracy learning through daily routines like cooking, shopping, doing laundry, setting the table. However, these type of activities are often overlooked in traditional measure of parental engagement. Another thing that I want to highlight is that older siblings play a key role in learning. However, most of the family engagement framework that we use doesn't account for sibling involvement. And the last thing is about the mothers. So mothers tend to engage less in math-related play activities compared to fathers and grandparents. However, most of our participants are mostly mothers, right? So I want to take a minute here because when we tend to say that Latina families do not engage as much as other groups in playing activity, it may be because the participants that we have in our study are mostly mothers. But if we look, we have a bigger picture of how the home mathematical environment, it may look that there are play times at home, but mostly with the fathers. So as a next step in my research, my goal is to shift this a trajectory of what Latina families do not know or what they are not doing, and actually value and leveraging their everyday practices and experiences. So my next step is I hope to develop an intervention looking at Latina parents' engagement and what this engagement look like in their environment and create materials that align with what they are actually doing at home. So thank you so much. And now I will stop with, and I will turn over to Dr. Caris Bowman. You're on mute, Caris.
Thank you, Jimena. I'm thrilled to be on this panel with such wonderful researchers and scholars that are contributing to the field on the topic of parent engagement. My contribution focuses on families' experiences with preschool suspension and expulsion. I am Dr. Karis Vaughman, and I'm an assistant professor of special education at Michigan State University. The contribution of my work on parent engagement is identifying the unique needs of families, experiences whose young children have been suspended or expelled from preschool. The focus of this research is motivated by decades of research conducted over the last 20 years that reveal a historic pattern of preschool suspension and expulsion. So children who've been temporarily or permanently removed from the regular educational setting due to real or perceived challenging or what some scholars are calling now interfering behaviors. Historically, the use of exclusionary discipline has disproportionately impacted Black boys, children with disabilities, and children who have experienced trauma. The graph I'm showing here today highlights more recent data collected during the period of 2020 and 2021 and recently released by the U.S. Civil Rights Office of Civil Rights in 2025 that shows that both Black and white preschool boys attending public preschools received out-of-school suspensions and were expelled at a rate higher than their rate of enrollment. So this highlights broader punitive shifts in how teachers are responding to children and how children experience preschool. And it clearly identifies that children need something and teachers are reacting to what they are experiencing in the classroom with children. We know that high quality preschool can lead to positive outcomes in children's cognitive functioning as well as social emotional functioning, and these effects can extend well beyond the early years. So ensuring that all children have access to high quality intervention and instruction is a matter of justice, so that each child has access to the same quality of instruction and intervention in order for them to grow and develop in ways that promote school readiness and support meaningful quality of life outcomes. One way to enhance the quality of intervention and instruction that we provide children is to apply a targeted lens to understand the unique experiences and specific challenges families face, particularly for families who are raising children with different needs. One way that I've addressed this area of justice in my own research is to examine families' experiences with preschool suspension and expulsion. And at the time I conducted this work, families' experiences with preschool suspension and expulsion were largely understudied, with the exception of one study by Dubé and Ostrowski published in 2015. So we had a lot of data, largely coming out of the U.S. Office of Civil Rights and the Gilliam et al. Study in 2005. At the time, it came out of the Yale Child Study Center. And it was kind of a landmark study to bring scholars and practitioners and policymakers awareness to the rates of preschool expulsion in particular. But we knew very little about families' experiences. So my team and I have conducted seminal work on families' experiences with preschool suspension and expulsion. And in this first study, using focus group methodology, we examined 3 families of mothers who identified as Black American, and we found that suspension and expulsion impacted their mental health. They often they also blamed themselves for the reason why their child was suspended or expelled, and parents expressed having aversive relationships with teachers, and, which was corroborated by earlier literature. In addition, they described the suspension and expulsion impacting their employment outcomes as well as their finances. Because this study only included one family with a child in early childhood, questions about the broader experiences of families with young children who were suspended or expelled remained. So I followed up on recommendations from the first study, and study 2 is essentially a replication of study 1 with a larger sample, and it was recently published in a special issue in ECRQ on advancing the science to prevent preschool suspension and expulsion. So you can pull up that latest special issue for ECRQ to learn more about what this study entailed. We asked similar questions to the first study. Our main questions were, how did families experience the early childhood programs, use of suspension or expulsion, and how did families perceive the support they received or did not receive from the early childhood program regarding their child's suspension or expulsion? Our method was similar to study 1. We conducted 2 focus groups and 14 interviews with families. Our sample was largely white women who were highly educated and were between the ages of 34 and 56 years. And the majority of the sample identified as the biological parent of the child who was suspended or expelled. The questions asked of families focused on their relationship with a classroom teacher, the child's relationship with a classroom teacher, what types of intervention supports were provided, re-enrollment experiences. So once the child was suspended or expelled from the school, what was the re-enrollment process? What were the family's experiences with having their child re-enrolled? And families' recommendations about what could have been done better around the suspension and expulsion process. So to answer research question one, how did families experience the early childhood program's use of suspension or expulsion? Families largely found the preschool and expulsion and suspension of their child to be incredibly traumatic and emotional, particularly having to recount the details of their experience. During the focus group or interview process, there were visible displays of emotion. Notably, though, families prior to the suspension or expulsion of their child perceived positive relationships with the program personnel, which created confusion later during the suspension or expulsion. For example, one family mentioned that she used to text her child's teacher about how the child was doing throughout the day. A large majority of the parents shared that there was a lack of clear and positive communication with the school personnel, often vague communication prior to the suspension or expulsion. So there was not a ton of communication about the child prior to the suspension or expulsion. And one family in particular mentioned that she should have seen that as a red flag because whenever she would ask about her child, the teacher would simply say, "Oh, he had a great day." And there was never any much more detail provided than that. And the mother said that she would like to have known, what did he learn? What did he do? There was just not a lot of feedback or communication provided. Along the lines of communication, families often mentioned that the communication was negative. There was often a lack of empathy from the teachers, blaming and shaming, telling the family that they cannot return and describing why the child could not return in front of the child, telling the family that while their child was in therapy, it was not working, and saying that the child was too messed up. So lots of very explicit shaming language, often in front of the kids, was communicated to the child and their family. Families often mentioned a need for more immediate communication about the child's behavior. A phone call right away would have been helpful, families shared, especially while the details of the child's interactions in the classroom were still fresh. Families mentioned still along this theme of no direct communication, families mentioned that they were not permitted to speak directly to the teacher about the child's behavior, which was concerning. When when the child was suspended or expelled, families were often asked to pick the child up, or were told that the child could only stay for part of the day. And then finally, another major theme to align with research question one is that the dismissal was often abrupt and caught families out of the blue. They found that the exclusionary discipline caught them by surprise and that there was no fair warning and that the exclusion was quite swift. There were three major themes that aligned with research question two. How did families perceive the support they received or did not receive from the early childhood program regarding their child's suspension or expulsion? There were large statements that aligned with a theme that school personnel did not provide adequate support. They often used non-evidence-based practice, placed children in other classrooms. They used timeout without understanding why the child was engaging in interfering with challenging behaviors. Teachers often admitted that they did not have the training to support the child and family, and recognized the need for additional training, particularly to support children who were neurodivergent or children who had experienced trauma and needed mental health supports. Families in the study also mentioned having to advocate on behalf of their child in a way that the administration and the teachers were not advocating for the child. So parents, as I mentioned, the sample was highly educated, primarily highly educated mothers, and so some of them were related service personnel. So they were in the field of education or special education, and so they were knowledgeable of the supports that their child should receive in the classroom. And they mentioned having to be the child's voice and share resources with the teacher. And they were working really hard to help the teacher understand what the child needed and working really hard to communicate collaboratively, mentioning things like, could the child have visual supports or be prompted in the classroom? And sometimes that communication or that advocacy was not effective enough to get the teachers and administration to be responsive. And then finally, the last theme aligned with this research question is teachers often engage in inappropriate discipline, so barricading children in a room for an hour with the teacher sitting by the door. One family shared about that particular experience, denying children recess or outdoor play, following instances of interfering behaviors, using in-school suspensions, and one family shared in particular that the teachers actually polled the children in the classroom and asked the children to draw a picture of how the particular child who was suspended or expelled made them feel. And then also reports of young children being sent to the office for their displays of not meeting expectations in the classroom. So, in conclusion, families found the preschool suspension and expulsion to be incredibly traumatic for them as caregivers, as well as for their child. Children often ask, "Why can I return to school?" And they were convinced that their teacher was a bad person because they couldn't comprehend that they, as a child, did anything wrong. They found, and this is in alignment with recent literature that has come, well, with the previous literature debate and Ostrowski, but even recent literature has noted the traumatic experience that families have experienced as well. Families, in conclusion, as well, there's just a lack of family-centered practices that families have shared in terms of frequent and transparent communication. We know that is a hallmark of NACCE's program standards, as well as the DEC's Division for Early Childhood's recommended practices. However, families were not experiencing family-centered practices. While most of the mothers were white women in the family, some of them had Black children. And so they noted that their children of color they felt were singled out or targeted for their behavior. One family mentioned that she perceived that the teacher was afraid of her son. And finally, this study highlights the importance of using program-wide evidence-based social emotional instruction at the program level to ensure that universal, targeted, and tertiary supports are in place to support children and families. And one thing about these program level multi-tiered systems of support in particular is that it is a model that changes teachers' behavior. Sometimes we think of it as a model to support children and families, which it is. But when teachers engage in these practices, it changes their behavior. They learn how to vary levels of support to ensure. And so it's important for us in terms of policy and practice to ensure that teachers are trained in these highly effective instructional practices, which can minimize or reduce and hopefully ultimately eliminate their need to use exclusionary discipline practices. So in closing, a lack of high quality instruction for children and poor parent professional partnerships have been noted as contributing factors to suspension and expulsion in the literature. And Zinser and colleagues have done some work looking at high quality teacher parent professional partnerships helps to mitigate preschool expulsion, particularly for Black children. And outcomes across the literature on families' experiences with preschool suspension and expulsion suggest there are 4 key variables or markers that promote or inhibit high quality parent professional partnerships. And those markers are focused on context, culture, communication, and connection. And understanding these markers and how they support children, teachers, and families collectively when designing parent engagement or parent professional partnerships in policy and practice are key areas for advancing the field and creating effective partnerships, specifically for children and families who have unique needs. So in terms of my own research, I will be moving forward with examining and assessing these quality indicators, if you will, and if they are effective in kind of moving the needle in intervention and assessment and reducing preschool suspension and expulsion. Thank you. I think I will turn it back to Dr. Sheridan.
Okay. Thank you all so much for really exceptional presentations and really fascinating research. In the interest of time, had a few key takeaways, but I think I'm going to just pause for a minute and just see about some reactions from the audience. You don't need to hear more from me necessarily. We really would like to hear what kinds of questions are on your minds. Are there any questions, Janelle, in the Q&A or the chat, or would anybody like to just go ahead and share any thoughts or concerns or questions?
Yes. Yeah, we can have all the presenters come back with your video and audio so we can go through. We have one question here. It was submitted by anonymously, but it's very nice to see how cultural groups may define family engagement and children's learning differently. Across all three studies, I wonder if families were given an opportunity to provide perspectives on how they perceived their role. If they were, I wonder how these perspectives or perceptions changed after the interventions and how the effect of the interventions were moderated by the initial perceptions. So, were parents given the opportunity in your studies to provide perspectives on how they perceive their role, and did that change any of your research going forward? So, Karen, it looks like you unmuted.
School intervention studies, Lisa and Karen.
I would say in ours, it was more of a individualized program. So the home visitor started with goal setting. What were the parents' goal with the program? What were the main things she was interested in doing? There was sort of like a menu of things to think about. There was a card sort where she picked priorities. So we didn't try to customize it for subgroups. It was more like just that element of letting each parent kind of reflect on what they most wanted to get out of in terms of growth for themselves as a parent and where they wanted to really emphasize with their child.
And that was a very similar in our intervention. It was embedded within the intervention and sharing their perspective and guidance. They were a partner in determining that, and how they perceive their role. I think future research for us is figuring out a good way to ask parents about their experiences, and in for our work, it's difficult. It's wonderful that it's such an embedded process, but it's somewhat difficult to ask parents about because it is embedded in programmatic processes. So kind of sorting through the discrete components can be a little challenging, but it is I think a call to our research team to continue to embed the parent perspective as we move forward.
I will just add that for the context with Latino families, for me was a little challenging that thing, because when I asked them like how they engage in learning at home, they will say that they don't do learning, they don't do teaching, because that is something that happened in the school settings. So it was like really going in deep on the conversation. And it was really, really nice, because at the end of the interview, they were like, oh, I didn't know that I did all of these things. And that was engagement. And some of the parents were actually telling me, like, what else can I do? And they were like, well, just keep doing what you're doing. Like, there were so many things that they were doing already, but they didn't know that that was engagement, that was learning. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. It is so interesting. We are about out of time, right, Janelle?
Yeah, it is at 2 o'clock. We had a lot of expertise to share with you all, so thanks for staying on. And we can stay on a couple of minutes, but if you need to go, you got to go, and we understand that. So thank you for being with us.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to Janelle and the team for putting this on.
Yeah. We can have certain questions followed up with later if you want. We'll send out everyone's emails if you need or want more information from our lineup. So thank you. Once you click exit, you will have a short survey pop up. So please fill that out to inform our future events. And yeah, thanks for everyone sharing your work and everyone for tuning in.